I've lost 3 peers, sergeant majors that stomped the same ground as me, right? So
Wow.
here I am, right, as this guy, right, served combat with them, been in that environment with them, wondering what the hell's going on.
Veterans are not trained to reach out, but if offered help, they'll take it. How do you help someone who may not want or realize they could use help? I tell you, I'll bet you Joe could answer this one. Dr. Rossman could answer this one, and I could answer this one, and we'd probably all say the same thing. It's one of the toughest challenges we have as people who want to help folks who are struggling with mental health or suicidality.
Dr. Rossman, good morning to you on a Saturday.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
I am doing fine. Thank you. Thank you. We have Mr. Nick Howland. He is a Navy officer veteran. He's also the CEO for the firewatch.org, which he founded in 2019, I believe.
Right. It looks like
20 years working
nice
in
to meet
the
you, Mr.
defense development business.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Rossman, good to meet you as well.
Likewise. Thanks for your service and thanks for your work since.
Well, thanks for everything you're doing on Mission Possible. I've started on a couple courses and I love the platform, and will definitely be a resource for all of our veterans out there. So,
oh, good.
Thank you.
Glad to hear that.
I think currently we have 2,672 or something like that, or I wrote the numbers down.
Yeah, that's it.
But I know
It's in
that,
the neighborhood.
Yeah, 2671, not bad. So you know, we're averaging about 6 to 12, sometimes 15, you know, a day.
Yep.
Registered users, you know, so that's a good thing. All word of mouth organically, you know, we're not throwing money at it. It's pretty much marketing itself because, you know, it's a user platform free, and I believe that it definitely provides a service to our veterans.
Yep.
And we don't, like I said to Dr. Marty Rossman, when we had this conversation many times, Nick, is that, you know, everybody goes to the gym and they focus on certain aspects of their body, you know, the middle level, you know, triceps, biceps, I'm going to get on that run or whatever, but we never really sit down and try to be a little bit mindful of, you know, why do we think this way? You know, what are the characteristics of our brain housing group? You know, why do I hold on to things? What can I control, can't control? And I think Dr. Marty Rossman actually hit the nail on the head in terms of this, you know, and we don't focus on that. Imagine if we had something like this, right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Marty Rossman and I, I'm going to call Dr. Rossman Marty because that's what I usually do. I hope you don't mind, but
yeah, absolutely.
But you know, imagine if we had this in the schoolhouse where the resiliency starts at the lower level. Imagine that, Nick, you know, and I know you're a data guy just like us and so forth, but imagine what we can contribute eventually, you know, teaching our young individuals mindfulness, you know, to understand how we think and why do we think that way, vice just, you know, hitting chat box and asking chat box what's going on in the world today. You know, why am I feeling this way? You know, because they're so secluded in terms of social media, it becomes their right and left peripheral. So they don't have that, you know, that wide peripheral of what's going on in the world. You know, they're narrow to that narrative from their buddies, followers, and as you know, the online content. But anyway, Dr. Marty Rossman, I love what he does. I believe what he does, Nick. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Marty Rossman right there, Marty. Nick is doing some wonderful things in Florida, and I'm hoping that he can give us a small spill in terms of, you know, where he started from and where he's at and where he's going to go with his organization, the firewatch.org.
Yeah, I think it's very important to, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Just what I see on your website, I think it's incredibly important because we did you know, suicidality is not my area of expertise, but it's certainly something that we know something about. And suicide in veterans, people have put themselves in harm's way or been willing to put themselves in harm's way. I think they deserve the extra support. And I think they're, you know, we talked about some of the warning signs of somebody who may be heading in that direction. And we talked about prevention being really the whole deal, because once somebody has killed themselves, you can't treat it or prevent it anymore. And so the idea of your, I think you call it watchstanders, and training people to, in the community, to be on alert for people that are showing signs that may lead to suicidality and connecting them with resources is how I understand it. I think that's a brilliant way to approach that. And I'd love to hear your, and then providing, I also understand a little bit about the veteran safe places, and I'd like to hear more about that. So you're not only identifying people, it sounds like, but making it easier for them and the watchstanders to connect them with resources that can, potentially save lives. And so I'd love to hear as much as you're willing to share about the program and how it came about and what you're seeing in terms of its effects in your community.
Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you, Dr. Rossman. You've hit it on the head. The Firewatch is Florida's fight to end veteran suicide, and we're ending veteran suicide by preventing veteran suicide. Our primary prevention program is what we call the Watchstander program, which you referenced. We're training community members in Florida where veterans live, work, and play, focused on training communities, members in where veterans live, work, and play, so they can identify the warning signs of veterans in crisis and easily and quickly get them to the help and resources they need. So how it all started. Joe, you were right. It was in 2019. So, we've seen this crisis of veteran suicide on a national scale and a state scale, even local and regional scale, really since 9/11. We've lost more to suicide, veterans to suicide, than we lost people in the global war on terror. And why it's material is because we're losing veterans at a rate that is 2 times that of civilians to suicide. So a bunch of us in Northeast Florida, the Jacksonville, Orange Park, St. Augustine, Amelia Island area, we're noticing in 2019 a really high preponderance of veteran suicides. It was happening all over the place, and it finally put us all over the edge. And at the same time, the VA secretary at the time, Dr. Wilkie, was talking about how much money the VA for the past 20 years had put into mental health treatment. And so he was trying to change the conversation to talking about prevention. So we said, well, why wait for the federal government to figure this out? We're America, right? We never wait for the federal government. There's community solutions. And so we decided that the solution would be ground up. We formed an organization. We called it the Firewatch. Joe, being a Marine, understands this. When someone is standing watch, they're not, for their peers or their squad mates or their company mates, they're not expected to be the expert on any particular issue. They're just supposed to notice when there's a change, sound the alarm, and get the right people on the problem. So, like me being a Navy guy, you're standing offshore the deck on a ship underway, and there's a fire down in the main space. You're not donning the flash gear and going and putting out the fire yourself. You're noticing that the sensors are going off. You're sounding the alarm, and you're mustering the fire team to go put out the fire. So in a way, our Watchstander program acts in the same way. We're training community members through a free 30 to 40-minute training on how to recognize those signs, recognize those anomalies, sound the alarm, and get the veteran to the help they need. We're training community members to stand watch for veterans, and it's working. Dr. Rossman, to your point, you'd like to know about the efficacy. We generally have 3 metrics that we chase: the number of watchstanders and where they are. That's metric number 1. We use data to determine where the veteran suicides are, so where we need to build that community support network. So that's metric number 1. Metric number 2 is, are the watchstanders, after they're doing the training, taking the training, doing what we ask them to do? So yeah, Joe, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think Nick and I think it was about a month ago, and you and I dug really deep into your data,
Yeah.
because I like to play with data as well, and everything, as a nonprofit of DVNF size is, we employ data. We need data to forecast and drive us in a direction of where our donors want us to go, whether it be programs or whatever the case is. And and I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no, you're right.
Like I told you there, Nick, you are onto something that can grab wheels and run. And you're missing, to me, you're missing just a couple little things where that would not only enhance but drive your organization to be a national organization, vice just subject to Florida, because you have the proof of concept. and I think that, I think that that's a direction which I would love to help you with, is
Yeah.
becoming a national foundation, because, I work in that field, and I can help you, get to that platform if you want, because I believe in what you're doing, and I think that, if you cultivate it like you're doing exactly for doing Florida, and you create that footprint elsewhere, and you can by having ambassadors and so forth. But I think you got a wonderful platform, and I love what you're doing right there, because as you know, there's not one shoe that fits all, but having someone understanding where the resources are, what the resources are, and how they can contribute, let it be a positive attribute, because as you know, there's so many negatives out there, negative attributes that can lead up to anxiety, and then another step would be, harming yourself or suicide, whatever the case is. So, there's so many negative attributes out there that fall under that umbrella of resources for veterans.
Yeah.
And actually provide a good crutch for them to actually work through some of those life challenges, and we want Mission possibly one of those, and I just think that, I think the concept's there. I like where you're going with this. I think,
I think it's brilliant.
This could be a wonderful national,
excuse me,
a foundation. What's your thought, Dr. Marty?
Well, what are the other metrics? You were starting to talk about the metrics you're looking at.
Well,
first one being the
Dr.
number.
Rossman,
the state and federal metrics, as you know, you're getting federal metrics late.
Exactly.
They're like a year late.
Joe hit it on the head. I mean, what's really funny is our biggest strength, which is data, numbers, tracking, which is how we're trying to fight veteran suicide, is also our biggest weakness, because we're hard around the edges. We're not very soft. We track data. And I was about to say our number 2 metric is our watchstanders doing what they say they were going to do. So we do a survey and we determine, are they engaging with veterans and are they referring veterans? And we have metrics associated with that. Then finally, our third metric is our veteran suicides coming down, where we've built our network, and we're seeing significant dramatic reductions where we are. Where we have a network in Florida over the last 3 years, we have a 16% decrease in veteran suicides. Where we have not focused building our network, it's an 8% increase. So it's really funny. I think Joe is absolutely right. He and I keep talking about strategically the direction of this organization, how we're fighting to end veteran suicide. And I think pinpointed right away what the hole that we need to plug. And that is that we're a data-driven organization. We're building a network out there based on data, tracking the data, but we're not out there showing a veteran with a dog or a guy carrying someone over, either shoulder or whatever. Our watchstanders are directing veterans to those resources. Those resources are our partners. But right now it's Nick, the finance guy, trying to solve the issue, how he knows how, and that's using numbers, facts, and data.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you can show that there was an increase in 8%, and where you have your program, there's a decrease of 16%. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And, I think maybe in retrospect, it's kind of obvious, but I think when I started to look into this, and especially look at the question of why is the suicide rate higher in veterans, and there's multiple factors from domestic trouble and alcohol and drugs and trauma and separation from your community. So I think isolation in one way is one of the major things, is that most veterans, especially combat veterans, have had really important and in many cases horrifying life experiences that the average person hasn't had. And when they're plucked out of their environment of people who do know that, and who know about that, and who are a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and have been molded into a unit that very few people really experience. Very few people have been it's like forming a team, and it's more than a team. It's a family, and people have risked their lives for each other and so on. And then you're just another guy or another woman, and you're back in your community, and you can't talk about it much, or you don't choose to talk about it much, and you're isolated. So for you to open the community and say, here's how you can help your brothers and sisters, and just by knowing the signs and watching out, and if you notice something going on, we can help you quickly connect with resources of people who have expertise and can help with a wide variety of problems. I think it's brilliant. It's really hitting a node that just brings people back into a community, in a sense, lets them know, I see you, I care about you, let me introduce you to so-and-so. I think it's absolutely brilliant when you can show that it works. What else can you ask for, except, as Joe said, get it out there to even more people, show other people how to do it.
You know, Dr. Rossman, there's this story that one of my, I've got 3 full-time trainers that go around and train businesses and organizations and their employees to be watchstanders, you know, and we use that program, engaging a business and training their employees to target where we want to have the watchstander network, where there's particularly high risk based on past veteran suicide data. But one of my trainers is a Marine like Joe, and he tells this story. He says, veterans don't ask for help, but if they're offered help, they'll take it. And the story he tells is when he was in the Marines and he was young and junior, and his squad was told the company's mustering at Camp Lejeune at some spot, and they didn't have a way of getting there, so they put on their packs and they humped to the spot, and it was about a half an hour hike to get there. And he remembers that another squad had a personnel carrier and drove by, and there was extra space in it. And as they're all humping through the heat in North Carolina in June, they all looked at that truck go by, and no one said a word. But 100 yards up, that truck stopped, backed up, and one of the squad leaders on the truck yelled, "Hey, do you guys want to get aboard?" And they all looked at their squad leader, and the squad leader said, "Of course, Marines." He said, "Marines don't ask for help, but if they're offered help, they take it. Jump aboard." And then they climbed aboard. I mean, that is the essence of what we're trying to do. We're trying to be that guy saying, "Hey, you want to ride?" or "Hey, do you need help?" or "Hey, how can I help you?" Because veterans are not trained to reach out, but if offered help, they'll take it. And we're training watchstanders to recognize those signs and offer help.
You know, I'm a watchstander, by the way, just to let you know, Nick.
All right, all right. Thank you, Joe.
I went through, got certified. But listen, you know, when I see something like this and I see the value in it, which I really do, I think, you know, my mind is like operates, you know, around corners and down the road, and I think, and I'd love to have more conversation with you again, because I want to partner with you, and I think that we can do some wonderful things together. We're very much like-minded via just personality-wise, military-wise, what we love to do, and what we're trying to bring to you know, our communities. But you know, I think, you know, having a corporate certification, you know, Firewatch template, or have a nonprofit that's like-minded to yours that wants to work in that field to be Firewatch certified. And the reason why I say that is because what you're doing is you're creating a force multiplying platform, right?
Yep. Yep.
Right. And you're extending that arm. Now you're not only looking for, you know, individuals, you know, that are related to first responders, family members, or whatever the case is, or military advice, but you know, they're you know, other nonprofits that want to, because they have the heart and desire, because they want to serve.
Exactly.
You know, that's the reason why I say I think that could be powerful, whatever. I like what you're doing, you know, and you know, I would love to hear a little bit more on where you're going with this, but just to let you know, I believe in what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I know Dr. Marty loves where you're going with this as well. And I want to hear some testimonies. And I know you have a few, but you know, when you first signed up for Mission Possible program that we have, what was your initial thought on the intake, or on the speed of getting the login information, downloading app, you know, that's the dashboard that you have? And I know you have to work through that course, but what was your initial thought on registering with Mission Possible?
Very easy. And of course, I'm familiar with the background platform, because the Mission Possible background platform is the same one that our partner PsychArmor uses to build our Watchstander training portal for online trainers. So it makes me, you know, I was able to sign up easy and go through it really easy. And what I love about it is you can log back on, continue your course progression, log off, you know, at your convenience, log back on, take another course, log off. I think it becomes, our program is to train community members to recognize the signs and get people to help. your program becomes help. You know, a self-healing resilience program at your own pace. And that's something that we can definitely include as a resource for watchstanders to refer veterans to. What I like about it is it's an upstream resource. So it's, you know, someone, if a watchstander is encountering a veteran or a family member who's talking about dealing with issues, you know, I'm not suicidal, you know, but I'm struggling through what's my sense of purpose in life now that I've left the service. You can have a watchstander refer them to the Mission Possible platform, just to take a self-paced, you know, resilience training and mindfulness training. And I think it's a great idea.
I definitely love where you're going with this. You know, you came up with the idea in 2019, and then of course you had to cultivate it, you have to build it. And I know, you know, everything costs money in terms of development. I know you're still working on some, like you said, working around some of those edges right there. And I know you have the clear path because we both spoke about it. I'm excited about your clear path, and you know, DVNF wants to contribite to that. So I'm going to award you $10,000, Nick, and
Joe,
I want you to apply that towards where you need to take Firewatch. And at the same time, I want to work with you. I want to just give you what I have, you know, in terms of what I know, or maybe linking you up with somebody that can help enhance or partner with you, whatever. I just want to be that force multiplier with you and your organization as well. So, and I think there's a lot of value there. And I don't think that we work in the field enough of getting, you know, more of the village involved, because, you know, I know Marty can contest to this, and, you know, I'm an older individual, but, you know, family values, moral compass, and all those things within communities. You know, I remember looking out the window on the second floor of Dane Ave in Albany, New York. And then before I went out there, I'm 13 years old. I look out and I'm looking for Philomena, you know, the Italian lady that stood out front of the window, and she's just nosy, but she knew my mother. So if I did something wrong, I know Philomena was on us. So we never wanted to go outside if Philomena was hanging out the window, you know, because it was that village. And that was part of the remnants of that.
yeah.
And then we had MW across the street, Maurice Williams, he'd look out for the kids in their neighborhood or whatever, and they knew our parents. But at the time, if you did something wrong, they'd scold you.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
And they kept you in line or whatever. We don't have that within communities. But imagine if we can bring back, you know, that social, I care about, you know, my community environment. I think that would be powerful. And I think that you would definitely have the right seed, and you're sowing it in the right direction. And honestly, I think that when I first met you and I heard about you and your platform, I was like, wow, this could be big. You know, that's the first thing I looked at, you know, and then I was like, okay, what's the quality of this? You know, and we talked about, wow, you can definitely do something well with this, because I like the way you broke your organization down, vice where the suicide rate was, and you measured it with placement of your watchstanders to the state and federal numbers. I know federal numbers come out late, but state's a little bit more accurate. And here's something too, you're not capturing all the suicides. You know that, right, Nick? Because
of course I know.
A lot of veterans sadly are not registered to VA. You know, DD 214 is not there. A lot of them are John Does. I mean, it's just a sad.
We know it's higher than what we're reporting.
And, you know, they're saying 20 to 22. Right. My God, my last 3 years as a Marine Sergeant Major, I've lost 3 peers, Sergeant Majors, that stomped the same ground as me, right? So here I am, right, as this guy, right, served combat with them, been in that environment with them, wondering what the hell's going on, because every time in the military there's a suicide, sadly, right? There's administrative stand down, and then we do death by PowerPoint, bring in individuals, you know, to knee-jerk reaction, right? But there's no continued suicide prevention awareness throughout, you know, the military right now, because they don't teach mindfulness and so forth. Now the Marine Corps, through our martial arts programs, you know, we have some mindfulness and things of that nature that helps our techniques and all that. But you know, and then they talk about the indicators, right? These are the indicators of possibly why this individual created, you know. But you know, I lost 3. So I asked myself, Nick, you know, and Dr. Marty, you know, is my glass still, you know, is it half full? Is it half empty? So I'm always in question that when I see a peer that I've served, you know, 100,000 years with, drill instructors with, training recruits, you know, been in combat numerous times, deployment, been through all the druthers of just being in the military, but also the familyness, the friendship, the value, the cut from the same cloth mindset,
Yep.
And Nick, how many times have you heard this? Complacency kills.
Yeah, right.
Right?
All
So
the
that's
time.
so if you think about all the programs out there from equine therapy, right?
Yep.
Fishing or whatever.
Yep.
What happens is when, I've been through all of them because, as the regimental sergeant major for the Wounded Warrior Regiment, I would take individuals out on these, little skirmishes in terms of being with nonprofits that are actually serving veterans.
Yeah.
And from cattle drives to fishing to you name it, the Marines, the wounded, and these are amputees and so forth, burn, come from polytrauma, and I'm taking them out there on cattle drives. And that moment, that week or whatever, their mind was on their brotherhood. Their mind was on learning,
Yep.
to ride that 2,000-pound animal, and groom it,
Yep.
and also cattle drive and team pinning and rustling cattle, and that was the greatest thing in the world. But that just takes care of the moment. And how long does that stick with that individual that gave them some serenity or whatever? The mind wasn't on what transpired or the anxiety of those negative triggers. That mind was actually doing something meaningful and focusing on something never done before. But then again, it brought a lot. And so the reason why I say that is because equine therapy works for the moment, unless it's sustained, right?
Yes.
Going fishing on a cold morning dew, whatever the case is, you pop your soda, whatever the case that for, and you put that line. That's for that moment. How long does that last, right? So the question is, and there's no answer out there right now. What cures PTSD?
Yeah, I don't know what cures
it's a mental
PTSD.
health
That's
thing. It's something's going on in there where we've been talking about suicide and their numbers for how many years? Since I've been a Marine and before that, the number hasn't changed or whatever. So everybody's creating these platforms that provide but don't cure, and I don't think there's a cure out there. But I'll tell you what does help me out, right? Because I'm combat wounded. I've seen some things in the world. I mean, I absorb these things like anybody else, but I tell you what, I wanted something more for DVNF, and I knew something was out there. I wanted something this, and my research and partnered with Dr. Martin Rossman. I believe in his literature. I believe in his concepts. It's just that you got to exercise them, right? You buy that treadmill for Christmas. You want to start the new year off, and January 15th, it becomes a laundry hamper or whatever the case is. But Marty, I tell you what, Marty has some wonderful products out there, and they work. It's meaningful. It's bringing this brain housing group to the gym. So we don't focus on that enough. And the point, and I'm not saying these programs we need out there. Every little thing, every little shoe does not fit one individual. So to have the myriad things of different resources out there that can help be a positive attribute towards that individual that's at that level, I think it's wonderful. But to have an organization like yourself that where to look, right? If I remember the first time I talked to a general, I didn't have the answer, but I knew where to look. So I went and found it, came back and gave me the answer. That's how we're taught. So I like the concept you have with your watchstanders as well, because they know what the resources are within their counties. That's awesome.
Well, I do have to say the dirty little secret of our program is that in training the 6,700 people that we've trained now, we're training people that asking the question is important. And we're training people that potentially being vulnerable, asking for help is important. So our training doesn't just on ostensibly you're learning the science and you're learning what resources are out there, but really what you're also doing overall is we're helping reduce the stigma of asking for help or asking the question. And maybe that is what you said, the kind of the solution that we need over time, instead of these one-time address the issue and then fire and forget. It's training people to say it's not bad to talk about suicide and to ask if someone is doing okay. It's not bad to recommend someone seek help or become aware of what the Veterans Crisis Line is, or that 211 is there to get them to resources that they needed. Our program essentially has taught potentially 6,700 people who never who grew up in a society thinking it's bad to ask for help, or that suicide is a negative thing, or that talking about suicide could lead to suicide. Our program has broken down those myths for 6,700 people, and that's something that we take pride in. We don't focus on it a lot, but if we can do our part to reducing the stigma of asking for help or asking the question, then I think we've been successful as well.
Yeah, I think these things all have their places, it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be, and it probably isn't going to be one thing that cures something that was created by multiple factors. So even though, if you look at the origin of PTSD, another area that's not my area of expertise, but that I know something about, it's, not everybody who's in combat, not everybody who's suffered trauma gets PTSD. As a matter of fact, most people don't. So a significant percentage do, somewhere around a quarter to a third get it, probably more than that, but again, hide it in some way, but not everyone gets it. So then you look at, like, why do some people get it and some people don't get it? And you look at, well, probably experiencing prior trauma and being somebody who was exposed to trauma, as Joe has shared in previous sessions, where you found a way to get through a traumatic childhood and make something of yourself, and learned a lot about yourself and work hard at it, but then you're exposed to another trauma. Absolutely. And then you don't have the tools to put it together in other ways. So you soldier on, you tough it out, and you grit your teeth, and that's the traditional way to do it. What you're opening up, both of you, and with a little contribution from me, is, you're opening up pathways for people to reconnect to other pathways and reconnect to life. So even your fishing trip, Joe, or your horseback riding or cattle driving stuff, I think yes, it's not a long-term cure, but it does interrupt a revolving wheel of thinking. We get into these, and especially traumatic experiences, they're like that little annoying rainbow that goes around in circles on your computer, and it just keeps going around and around and around the same loop. And what we know now, from neuroscience, is that going around that same loop actually cuts grooves in the brain. It establishes neural networks that reinforce each other. So you go down this well-worn, track that reinforces itself every time it goes through. So just breaking that up, it's sort of like the Control-Alt-Delete, it's like, okay, stop that, and having another experience does open for some people, like, oh, wow, it doesn't have to always be that way. And it makes room for the question of, maybe there's something else that I can do to build some new networks, or to feel better, or to reach out and to use resources, and then to have a community of people around you who's watching you and cares about you and can help connect you. It all fits together. I mean, it's, in a really, and for some people, one's going to be more important than the other. And but for somebody who's already developing signs and a lot of suicidal ideation, and has the means and has the knowledge of how to do that, connecting them up with other people, they're going to be the least likely people to say, oh, I think I'll take a self-improvement course. And just kind of take a self-paced, isolated course. That's part of the issue that I have, and that most people in my field have, is we know these tools work, as Joe said. We know that just like we know if you go to the gym and you're regular about it and you're not an idiot and you don't overdo it, and hurt yourself, we know if you go 3 times a week and you do it for a few months, you're going to be stronger and fitter and more flexible, and probably even in a better mood and happier on many levels. And these tools that I've put together, which are not things I've invented, but just learned about and put together over 50 years of treating people with stress and anxiety and depression and PTSD, we know that they work. And the challenge is, how do we motivate people? How do we support them? And how do we one is, how do we let people know that they're there and why they're important, which connects with your program, Nick. But the other is, how do you motivate people, like Joe said, to keep using that exercise bike till you get over the hump and you start to feel the benefits of it. So they all have their place.
Absolutely do. Absolutely do. And
Well,
there's a question in the Q&A I was just reading. Can I
sure.
talk about it, Joe?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, a gentleman says here, how do you help someone who may not want or realize they could use help? I tell you, I'll bet you Joe could answer this one. Dr. Rossman could answer this one, and I could answer this one, and we'd probably all say the same thing. It's one of the toughest challenges we have as people who want to help folks who are struggling with mental health or suicidality. And what we tell our watchstanders is if you recognize someone who's showing the signs and they don't want to help, please don't give up on them. Please don't give up on them. On the other hand, don't ignore them. So everyone, I think even people who seem really abrasive from our experience, still want to know that someone out there cares about them and is thinking about them. So we ask our watchstanders, we get this question from time to time during trainings. We ask our watchstanders, I mean, almost this simple, schedule a regular meeting on a regular reminder on your phone to reach out to them. Now, don't do it like clockwork that it becomes so obvious, but find a way to reach out to that person, tell them you're thinking about them. And if, they want to meet every so often, or if you can do something for them, or introduce them to a new resource, just to keep the conversation fresh, to make sure that veteran or that reclusive person or that person who doesn't want help knows that there's someone out there who cares about them. And actually Mission Possible now could be one of those kind of resources that a watchstander might use to kind of break through with someone like that. I don't know.
I think,
Yeah, that's
having-
true. That's really true. The first thing I'd probably, if send them we could probably find a way to do that, just send them a fairly simple guided imagery audio. Would you be, the question that we've learned to ask people, I mean, because this is true, we doctors see people, they're stressed out of their gourds all the time. It's the most, it's like there are lots of organizations and research that shows that something like, it's unbelievable in one sense, but if you are a primary care doctor, it's not, that 75 to 90% of all visits to primary care doctors are directly or indirectly related to stress.
Yeah.
And so that a huge part of our job is how to deal with stress, which nobody teaches us. So when I talk to doctors groups, I always say, the first thing I always say is, I'm just curious, how many of you think that stress and a person's mental attitude is a really significant factor in their health and illness? And 100% of them raise their hands instantaneously without thinking about it, just boom, like that.
Yeah.
And then say, how many of you have ever been educated in how to teach people to reduce stress? And it's about 2 out of 100. So it's, it's another area of life where this is much undervalued. So we know these things are helpful. And what I teach my doctor students, and they say the same thing that you were saying, is like, yeah, but it's really dicey talking to people about stress and without making them feel guilty, or they tend to feel guilty, or they don't want to deal with it. I'm doing okay. It's okay. I don't need it. And the question we ask, I'm sorry to be so long-winded, is that I've taught them to ask, is to ask people, would you like to learn a way to be more comfortable and relaxed? And it's very rare for somebody to say, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, oh, okay. And then if you can give them, like we can actually give them as little as a 3-minute, but if you can give them something like a 12-minute little guided imagery, a little breathing, a little muscle relaxation, a little bit of imagine yourself back on the cattle drive or fishing with your friend or somewhere, some experience you had that was positive and so on. People get an immediate experience. And if you can get them just even over that hump, that starts to give them some. So that may be something that, I don't know, Joe and I will have to talk, but that may be something that's just, can I send you a link to something that'll help you feel more relaxed?
Great idea.
Okay.
Well, I think it's all good, I mean, especially when we can, provide, a resource, but I think this would be good for your watchstanders as well, Nick, because, educating your watchstanders on mindfulness, or have them go through the course, which isn't difficult whatsoever, just
Yep.
gives them more, knowledge is power. It gives them more opportunity. So if it's working for them, or they feel that it can work for them and they enjoy the tools, then they can use that as a resource, or that could be a conversation that they had. I always, when I talk to, friends, family, whatever the case is, workers, whatever, how's your mindset today?
Yeah.
Mindfulness. That's because, believe it or not, there's organizations out there and companies that highlight mental health days, that encourage it and so forth. And we should, because, sometimes we're exhausted up here. If I read half the day, I'm totally exhausted. And my mind's exhausted. My body's fine.
Yep.
But I think providing these resources to start off with your fire watch standards, or your watch standards, and I just empower them just a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. I got a
of course,
question.
we're open, so you can, and it's free.
Yeah.
So we can talk about how we can pair that up with your watchstanders and take it from there.
I think we can definitely do that, and I think it'd be a great benefit to both our watchstanders and the veterans that they're standing watch for sure.
Yeah, that would be the place to start. So I have a question for you, Nick, and it's just in sort of flailing around. We're all trying to understand suicidality and how to prevent it and how to get people. And what you're doing is really, really significant. But in continuing to kind of sort through and look at information about suicidality, especially in veterans, something I looked at this week was that there's a tremendous, even more than in civilian suicide, in veterans, there's about a doubling of the rate of suicide after the age of 75.
Yes.
And, we can kind of common sense understand as you get older, I'm an older guy, as you get older, some things get harder, some things get easier, but some things get harder. You lose more friends, you lose maybe more of the connections that you had in the first place. The things that you did 40 years ago seem less important or less relevant. You may be poor, you may be homeless, you may not have food. I mean, life may really suck for you, even more than it did when you were just struggling with mental issues. So what's your experience with that?
Yeah.
And your experience, through your program, have you learned anything about that? And found any resources that are particularly helpful to that group?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, Dr. Rossman. And for sure, the hotspots across the state of Florida are Northeast Florida, the Tampa Bay area, and Southeast Florida. And if you look at the historic veteran suicide challenge by age group in each of those three areas, they're a little bit different. Jacksonville is more of and Northeast Florida is more of active duty military town and a business town. Tampa kind of the same way, but a little bit more retirees. Southeast Florida is almost retirees. So if you look at the kind of spread of veteran suicides by age group, you'll see Southeast Florida by far the over 75 group, and then next over 55 group have the highest rates and numbers of veteran suicide. Mm-hmm. You mentioned early on when we first started talking, we have an organization, a program called the Veteran Safe Place program. But really all we're trying to do in the Veteran Safe Place, it gives a business, a church, an organization, a accreditation that, like Joe was mentioning, that they are a veteran safe place. And you have to train 50% of your employees, or 50, whichever's smaller, to get that accreditation. And then we do little things like give them a sticker if they're a retail business for their window or whatever. And all that means as a veteran safe place is that your employees have trained as watchstanders, so they know to recognize the warning signs. It's a place where someone can direct you to resources if you need it. We will use that program to target that demographic. So about a year ago, we started to see an increase in African-American numbers in the Northeast Florida area. And so we reached out to some churches to train their parishioners and their staff in a certain area, because we can track not only by county, but by zip code, and then within zip code by age, race, and gender. In Southeast Florida, my trainer down there focuses a lot on retirement areas, and has great relationships with all the American Legions and VFWs and things like that. So his mindset is, how do I build a watchstander network, not just in this geographic area that's high risk, but in the demographic or age group that's high risk. So if you were to, we don't collect demographics on our actual watchstanders, but if you were to collect the demographics on the watchstanders in Southeast Florida, they're going to be an older group because that's where our trainer has been trying to focus training people to recognize the signs. So that's how we deal with that issue. We watch the trends and then we focus our program accordingly. And that's what we've been doing. And it's not, Florida, of course, has a higher retirement numbers than most states. But as you said, nationwide, we're losing by count veterans in the older age groups more. But when we're in the VA and everyone else in the market of suicide prevention, particularly veteran suicide prevention, is the highest rate of veteran suicide prevention is in that young group, 18 to 34. Why that's so worrying is that that's the veteran age group growing the fastest in our country as people leave their first enlistment or their second enlistment. And that's scary because if we don't address the problem in that age group, the problem's only going to grow. So,
well, the problem starts if you're talking about somebody leaving the military, and then within the 18 months of being EAS or getting out to 36 to 38 months later, they're committing suicide. Well, if I'm a young corporal, right, I'm hanging out, I've been through 4 or 5 deployments, I'm worn out. They want to promote me to sergeant, but I'm going to leave, go out back to my community and just find out who Joe is all again and all that. That's what they want. They really want that, right?
Yep.
So they do that. But while they're in and they're going through all these, deployments and anxiety and absorbing new things and combat environment and what's happening in our world, they pretty much maintenance each other, right?
Yep.
We tend to help and humor ourselves, and we push those uneasy feelings and things that we work through our deployments and just being a military guy, just the stamina, and we put it on that back burner, and we're both good at that. We help each other with that, right? But they still want to get out. They know there's something more. They want to learn who they used to be because, as you know, you become somewhat military institutionalized to be that fighter, because that's what we want, right? And then they get back out in civilian world. All right, so they're out there with mom, dad, brothers, whatever. Their friends are sitting on the same corner. They got a bigger belly, whatever the case is. Half their teeth are missing, and they can't relate to anybody, right?
Yeah.
They can't relate, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not at that operational level no more, right?
Yeah.
So they can't share what's actually bothering them because they don't have that relationship. So they tend to suppress it a little bit more, right? So now they're getting antsy. What do? They smoke marijuana, they do whatever, alcohol, pills, whatever to help suppress that because they're all suppressing. And then of course it becomes to a point, they start asking themselves, is my glass half empty, half full?
Exactly right.
And we sustain their life in the military because of relationships, small team, or whatever the case is, the environment, right? We sustain each other. Mindset, they say that complacent kills, right? So here he is out there in the world trying to find out who he is, leaving not only the high tempo of deployment and all that, but leaving the adrenaline, the process, everything. And I'll tell you what, if you're a company out there and you want to hire a veteran, I tell you what, they're going to be a rock star, period.
Yep.
They're going to be your best employee.
Yep.
Right. So I make no excuses for veterans. I don't have woe is me as a CEO for DVNF for veterans. I don't have a woe is me because they're all great. But we have issues. Some have issues more so than others, or whatever the case is, which could be remnants of being in combat and suicide. But before they go in the military, and Dr. Marty Rossman and myself had this, is that we all have a resiliency.
Yeah.
Right. On how we process, we maintenance and ourselves and so forth. And you can't pick and who you choose you're born with, born to or from, and then of course, you get the rest of society and so forth and so forth and so forth. So it's pretty deep stuff, but years ago, they sent us over to Iraq, we wanted to win the hearts and minds. Right?
Yep.
That was the mantra, to win the heart and minds. Why? Because Saddam, right, being in power for thousands of years, right, children were mindfulness of his leadership, his mindset, hating the West and all this, whatever it may be. They grew up to adults, right? And then their children and so forth. So win the heart and mind was like, we have to win their heart to change their mind.
Yeah.
So the question Dr. Marty asked me goes, did it work?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe it did, because they played both sides of the fence.
Mm.
And when you have religion, this is my thought, I don't want to get politics, that religion run state, there's always something, vice having state run, anyway. But That's my thought. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. You see that dip from 18 months leaving the military to the 36, 38 timeframe, and you can't put your finger on it.
No, I mean,
I'm not saying I have but I know because I deal in that, I have, sadly, I know more service members that have taken their life throughout my military career as well as being retired and my peers. And that
Yeah.
bothers me because I start analyzing, I start looking back on my resiliency, what I've been through, what I've done, how am I working through this? What tools are good for me? What are my, what are my pressure buttons and so forth? But I think about those things all the time when you have somebody that grew up in the military with, stomped the same ground, served in combat or whatever, and you think highly of because they're all wonderful, and then you wonder what the heck happened. Where was their breaking point?
We know, and the VA reports this commonly, that the most vulnerable point for a veteran to attempt suicide is in their first 12 to 18 months out of the service. It's just what you're saying right there. And I think Dr. Rossman said, it'd be interesting to explore the factors of why veterans are dying by suicide at a rate 2 times that of civilians. Whenever anyone asks me why I think that's happening, I say, well, I think a lot of the factors that lead to suicide in veterans are the same as civilians, but maybe they're exacerbated in veterans. And it always seems to me to come down to some element of loss, loss of sense of purpose, loss of that camaraderie because you're no longer with your teammates or your squad mates or your shipmates, financial loss or uncertainty because for the last 8 years in the service, 2 enlistment periods, you've been, you had a steady paycheck, where you're going to live, what your next job is. They even teach you how to buy a car, and suddenly you're out in the world on your own. To me, it's maybe isolation comes with it, which again is a loss of sense of team. So I think loss plays a big part of suicidality in veterans, and it's not only just that 18 to 34-year-old. Dr. Rossman, you were saying the over 75 is critical. One of the things we're seeing in Northeast Florida in the last 3 years is we seem to be addressing, and we focus specifically on the younger veterans because we have 2 major military bases here, and it's a top retirement or working destination for those who want to retire or get out. So we've focused on my guy here who goes around training 24/7 full-time here, focuses on the local community colleges, training folks and veterans there, focuses on businesses that employ veterans, churches and things like that in order to reach the younger demographic in Jacksonville. But now we're seeing a spike in the older demographic, and we've been having a community conversation about why that could be in Northeast Florida when we haven't had a significant change in population of veterans from older, to older, like they have that population distinguished down in Southeast Florida.
Interesting.
And United Way of Northeast Florida basically said, we think it has something to do with right now, this spike in the last year or two, potentially has something to do with the financial crisis, the housing crisis in older people. So it's loss again.
People across the board, young people can't afford to buy housing. I have a question for both of you. Sorry to interrupt, Joe.
Okay, no, go ahead.
But there's 2 things. One, Mary was kind enough to put in a comment that I'll just synopsize because I appreciate it. She said it would be so amazing for stress relief skills to be taught more and taught earlier. She's found that stress is the biggest trigger for suicidality, thinking for herself, not sadness or feelings, but straight up stress. When things get too intense, it feels like an explosion that keeps going off inside me that I want to stop at all costs, even if it means my mind and body stop too. Working backwards to address the stress has really made a difference for me over the years. I started improving on my own after meditating or beginning to meditate. Watching the course videos have also added to my repertoire of things to reduce stress. I still struggle, but things are much improved. So thank you, Mary. But I have a question that something you said, Nick, came to mind in terms of and being a non-military person. And you mentioned the uncertainty and, getting out and so on and so forth. So I've wondered how much of it has to do with, there's a certain, what am I going to say? There's a certain comfort for many people. I'm not one of them in being told what to do. So there's a lot of stress that comes when you have to make your own life decisions that's relieved. I mean, prisoners will say this. People who go to bat and recidivist prisoners will say this. I get 3 meals a day. I know what my routine's going to be. I hate it. It sucks. There's a lot of bad things about it, but there's a certain stress on a day-to-day basis of how am I going to get my mortgage paid and take care of my kids and do this and that and the other thing. So the question that came to my mind is, what is the comparative rate of suicide in officers versus enlisted men and women?
I wish I had that data, and I don't. And the reason that I don't have that data, and I don't think the VA does either, is because when our source of raw data is the same as the VA's, and that is death certificates, where they check has the individual served and what was the cause of death, and it was suicide. And I think so there's no distinction between them. And I'm not sure the VA and their annual data, if they take that data and they put out a distinction between officers and enlisted. Joe, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and I agree with you, because the way the federal government does it is they do it by, I mean, of course, try to peel young back on getting, branch of service rank when they were discharged, what year they were discharged. I mean, just to go through that whole process. I think they're looking for the veteran and age group pretty much more so than anything else, and that's where they parallel align it with,
What would you expect to find? Well, I would expect to find a huge discrepancy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they do branch of service, they do veteran, and they don't do officer, staff, NCO. But yeah, if they're active duty, all right, if they're active duty, because you got to realize now there's 22 veterans a day, right? And then you have your active duty that commit suicide daily. That's a whole different category. They're talking about veterans, ones that served in Vietnam 2 years. We had 2-year stints, from 6 years to being in the Air Force to, whatever. So they're veterans, right? So out of that population, how many veterans registered with the VA, right? That's a percentage number. That's a data point, right? How many veterans, I mean, if registered with the VA can tell you where their zip code is, or actually, what county they're living in, whatever the case is. So that's another point data right there. So that's a double whammy. You need that. The VA, I mean, the VA, they're not, I don't see it. They're not showing it if they have it, but they don't. I don't think they have it, because they can say, okay, this individual is a veteran.
Well, honestly, it wouldn't be a thing.
I mean, back in terms of branch of service, yes. Age group, yes. That's it. But anything else, I don't think they put out there.
Well, honestly, you wouldn't want to show that. I mean, if I was running the armed service, I would not want to say, be an officer. But I would expect, just like in civilian life, that people who are executives and managers, it's not that they don't have stress and they don't commit suicide too, but it's much more common if you are one down and you're having trouble getting a job and you don't have money and you can't buy a house, and you find all these challenges in civilian life. As
when I graduated DI school, back in 1994, as a Marine drill instructor, we had, I think, like 81 students, only 50 graduated. And out of those 50, 28 survived in terms of just not doing something stupid, getting kicked off the drill field because of complacency and just being stupid because you have all that authority. And then again, we had a few suicides, right? A couple females, a male individual. Sergeant Stump, you probably heard about that Marine that shot himself, sadly, down there at Paris Island at the pool and so forth. So that was my peer guy. That was, so I, sadly, and then, there's a knee-jerk reaction after that, administrative stand down. Let's pilling it back. What do we do right? What do we do wrong? Let's look at that individual service record. Was it a good Marine or a bad Marine? What was his accomplishments? Is he married? Does he have children? Is he alcohol? And did he have, they look at everything on active duty, right? And then there's no letter, there's no nothing. It's just action, and you're gone, right? That's what happened with these individuals, and that's what happens out there in the military. Just like I don't know if I told you this story. I'm a gunnery sergeant, right? And I'm a range officer for the day. So I go out to the rifle range, LZ, Bluebird, or whatever the case is out there, and the back end where the rifle range is, and I'm the officer of the day for that. And I just need to make sure the cycle of operations continues and everybody's on time. So I'm that guy. So just observing. Well, there's one there's one individual, I know we have to go here, but this
Yeah, we
individual
just
was being tormented by his peer group because he was a wasn't a very good shooter. And he needed to hit expert, or actually needed to qualify sharpshooter to be, to get his next rank, be corporal. But they already surpassed him the following year. So peers beat him up a little bit in terms of just being mean or whatever the case is, just being jarheads. And then he was, woe is me, whatever. He just gave up on everything. So I gave him a ride home, right out the front gate, Midway Park. And he ended up killing himself that evening. He hung himself. He tried to share with his wife. They were both young, didn't have any children. And his wife wanted nothing to do with him. He was at that point, I guess. And he locked himself in a room and hung himself. And then I get a phone call, and then we all get phone calls. And then we were back in the movie theater, knee-jerk reaction, whatever the case is. But I look at that.
Yeah.
And I look at it. So now I can see, okay, I wish I was more observant, which I was. I told him that I put him on the next range and, we're going to get him there and I'm going to help him a little bit here. So I gave all that positive and all that. But it wasn't at that point where I didn't think he was going to do something to harm himself because he was upset. Yes, he was tearful and so forth. And his concentration of thought was because of his peer group. Now he has to go back to work and deal with it again. Right. So that peer group pushed him to that point of taking his life. That's my thought on how that transpired. But so I have a lot invested.
Well, another person might not have.
These things can help as well, and what Firewatch has to offer. And I just wanted to share that with you because we're all in those scenarios, sadly. But you have to recognize.
Yeah, we're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to help. I think what
exactly
you gentlemen are doing is fantastic. I think there's probably a natural synergism between what you're both doing and maybe a little bit with Mission Possible as well. So all good things to you. And I think we should, we'll give our participants a break here. It's just about 10 o'clock and just more power to both of you and what you're doing. You're both doing extremely valuable things. And it's an honor really to meet you and to work with Joe has been a real honor, and Nick, I hope there's a way that there's a synergy that can work there, and we can reach more veterans and understand more about what causes this and ways to alleviate it and prevent it.
Absolutely, Nick. Really appreciate having you, Nick. Nick Howland, firewatch.org. I really want to work with you down the road here. I know that we'll collaborate. Like I said, $10,000, I'm hoping that can contribute to where you want to go in terms of that. And I'm hoping that we can partner more and all that. Love what you're doing, Nick.
Joe and Dr. Rossman, thank you so much for having me on. Thanks for the advice. Thanks for the support. And thanks for everything that you guys do for veterans. Really appreciate it.
Likewise.
Awesome, brother. You're doing a wonderful thing. Hey, all life challenges can be managed. Mission Possible. You guys have a wonderful afternoon.
You too.
Marty, always pleasure, brother.
Likewise, Joe. Take care.
Thank you, gentlemen.